China has declared war on the U.S. Actually, they did it a long time ago. The U.S. just hasn't noticed. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. I know we've all been busy dealing with the war on Europe's doorstep, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but while threats from Russia are more immediate, threats from China are greater. As the FBI director put it last month, no country poses a more severe threat than China. And that's because from the Chinese Communist Party's perspective, they're already at war with America. It's not kinetic warfare, even though they've been training for it. And it may happen if they try to invade Taiwan, which they've also been training for. But the Chinese Communist Party hopes to avoid that kind of boots-on-the-ground war by defeating and demoralizing the U.S. with political warfare first. Now, from our Western mindset, political warfare doesn't count as war. And therefore, there's very little political willpower to actually do something about it. Just like there was very little political willpower to go after Russia until they physically invaded Ukraine. But that doesn't mean it's not war. In the Chinese Communist Party's internal documents, they talk about political warfare all the time. It's not a secret, it's just not well understood by the people they're at war against. Us. So allow me to break it down. The Chinese Communist Party is currently engaged in at least 5 different types of warfare against the United States. Number 1, cyber warfare. The Chinese government, not just private actors, is targeting the United States with numerous and complex cyber warfare operations. What are they targeting? Every single industry. According to the U.S. government, these malicious cyber activities target healthcare, financial services, the defense industry, energy, government facilities, chemical, critical manufacturing, including automotive and aerospace, communications, information technology, international trade, education, video gaming, faith-based organizations, and even law firms. Yes, the Chinese regime is coming for our video games and our law firms. To arms, America! To arms. And in case you think that all that's in the past, it's not. It's happening right now. The Chinese regime is also conducting operations worldwide to steal intellectual property and sensitive data from research sectors working on COVID-19 response. So their cover-up of COVID leads to a global pandemic, and then they steal America's research on how to stop COVID. That's called closing the loop. The Chinese regime's cyber warfare is about bolstering China's economy, including their manufacturing and technology sectors. It's also about making the U.S. economy weaker. White House officials said in 2019 that technology theft and other unfair business practices originating from China are costing the American economy more than $57 billion a year. Other estimates have put the amount of theft 10 times higher. The truth is, no one exactly knows. Private companies don't usually go public when they get hacked because it hurts their stock price. But you know what else hurts stock prices? Getting your intellectual property hacked and replaced with cheap Chinese knockoffs 5 years down the line. Which brings me to number 2, economic warfare. Right after this short break. Welcome back. The Chinese Communist Party is engaged in economic warfare. They want China to replace the West as the manufacturing hub of the world, which it almost has. The Chinese Communist Party understands a fundamental economic principle that's been true for centuries. Whichever country controls manufacturing controls the world. Americans should understand this. After helping China join the WTO 2 decades ago, the U.S. has lost nearly 4 million jobs to China. The loss of American manufacturing has hollowed out America's middle class while enriching Chinese companies. Companies that take advantage of cheap labor and sometimes even slave labor in China. That cotton t-shirt you're wearing? It might be made by Uyghur slave labor. Of course, China isn't just making our t-shirts, it's also making our electronics, solar panels, medicines, face masks, machine parts, the list goes on and on. That makes the U.S. extremely dependent on China. In fact, China is dominating medical manufacturing so much that when the Biden administration promised to distribute 500 million free COVID tests, the U.S. wasn't making enough. So the U.S. is now spending $1.3 billion to buy COVID test kits made in China for Americans. And with Americans being dependent on China, imagine what would happen if we got into a kinetic war with China. They could cut off our supply of goods, just like they hoarded face masks right after the pandemic started. This is not an accident. It's part of the Chinese regime's economic warfare. When they try to take over Taiwan later this decade, there will be a lot of people in the U.S. who say, wait, we still need to work with China. Let China take Taiwan so we don't have to lose our trade relationship. So economic warfare now helps them prepare for kinetic warfare in the future. In the meantime, we'll just keep buying Chinese t-shirts made with ethnic slave labor. We should all be buying ones that say, I turned a blind eye to ethnic cleansing in China and all I got was a slightly cheaper t-shirt. Seriously though, buy that t-shirt. It's real. And it's available now at chinauncensored.tv/merchandise. Link is below. And don't worry, it's not actually made in China. Number 3, legal warfare. The Chinese Communist Party may be a rogue regime that puts itself above Chinese law, but that doesn't stop them from using legal warfare against other countries. According to the Chinese state-run Legal Daily, legal warfare involves arguing that one's own side is obeying the law, criticizing the other side for violating the law, and making arguments for one's own side in cases where there are also violations of the law. The Chinese regime uses their own legal framework to undermine the rule of law in other countries. For example, last year, China passed a law allowing their Coast Guard to fire on foreign vessels, as well as demolish any structures other countries build on South China Sea reefs that China claims. That'll come in handy next time there's an incident in the region. Sure, we opened fire on you, but we were just following Chinese law. Meanwhile, when an international court ruled that the Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea belonged to the Philippines, China just ignored the ruling. You might think that's hypocritical, and you'd be right, but as I've said before, hypocrisy is the Chinese Communist Party's superpower. In mid-2020, at the height of the coronavirus pandemic, the Chinese regime launched a legal warfare pandemic, the Hong Kong National Security Law. On the surface, it was designed to quash dissent after the 2019 Hong Kong protests. It worked, but it also aims to quash dissent outside China. It applies to literally everyone on Earth. Like for me, my coverage of the Chinese regime's crackdown on Hong Kong in 2019 would be considered subversion, even though I was the one being tear-gassed. And according to Article 38, the law applies to me even though I'm not a resident of Hong Kong or China. And it's retroactive, meaning I can be charged for something I did before the law was passed. Not that my coverage of China today isn't also subversive. Now you might think this doesn't matter to you because you're not in China's jurisdiction. But what if you criticize the Chinese Communist Party in a public forum in the US, and then you visit a country that has an extradition treaty with China? You could theoretically be arrested under the national security law. And with China seeking more and more control over Interpol, the international police, they could one day try to use that to go after people in any country. So how can you stay safe from this? Shut your mouth and don't go against the Chinese Communist Party. That's legal warfare. More after the break. Welcome back to number 4, opinion warfare. China is spending billions every year to make the world love it. And not just with billboards in Times Square. They've been putting editorial content in American newspapers like the New York Times. They're even funding top universities like Harvard. Their goal? To make Americans love China, to make the Chinese authoritarian system seem desirable, to make Americans afraid of going to war with China over Taiwan. After all, war would damage our trade relationship. Except China is already at war with us. And they use opinion warfare to make us afraid to stand up. For example, COVID-19. It was originally called the Wuhan virus by Chinese state-run media. But when Americans, including President Trump, started using that same phrase, Chinese state-run media were like, hey, that's racist. And then that idea got picked up by American media. When Trump uses terms like Wuhan virus or China virus, experts say it's dangerous. China's public opinion warfare was so successful that it made Americans hesitate to even say the virus originated in China for fear of being called racist. That's why we're all calling it COVID-19 now. The problem is, China's successful opinion warfare has now made it harder to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable. But they are responsible for the virus. Their 6-week cover-up is what allowed it to spread in the first place. And that's just one example of successful opinion warfare. It seeps into every aspect of politics, media, and academia. And finally, number 5, biological warfare. And no, I'm not going to talk about what you think I'm going to. YouTube would instantly demonetize this video. But I will say that the Chinese People's Liberation Army has been working on biological warfare for a very long time. In fact, the 2017 edition of Science of Military Strategy debuted a section about biology as a domain of military struggle, similarly mentioning the potential for new kinds of biological warfare. A Chinese paper in 2015 by Chinese military scientists and weapons experts said that coronaviruses could be artificially manipulated into an emerging human disease virus, then weaponized and unleashed in a way never seen before. And in March 2019, a Canadian lab sent lethal virus samples, including Ebola, to China. For research. As one expert put it, the Chinese activities are highly suspicious in terms of exploring those viruses as biological warfare agents. On top of that, Chinese military scientists have been experimenting with gene editing on a scale that would be unethical and illegal in the West. One reason is that China is trying to create enhanced super soldiers. Like Captain America, but for China. Wait, someone's already come up with that. We're living in the worst timeline. So I've just mentioned 5 types of political warfare that the Chinese Communist Party is using against the United States. They're useful tools now, and especially in the future, if the war with China turns kinetic. And there's more than just those 5, but I'll have to save those for a future episode. So what can the US do? Wise up! Recognize that China is already at war with the US, so we can stop it before it turns into a Russia-Ukraine situation. Don't buy into the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda, and most importantly, don't be afraid to call them out for what they're doing. In the meantime, help us with our own battle to stop the Communist Party's political warfare. Since YouTube demonetizes so many of our videos, one way you can help is by buying and wearing our China Uncensored t-shirts. They're available at chinauncensored.tv/merchandise. That includes our latest design I mentioned. I turned a blind eye to ethnic cleansing in China, and all I got was this slightly cheaper t-shirt. Again, that shirt is not made in China. Click the link below to check it out. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.